In a world where rules exist for a reason, some people still believe they're above it all, expecting special treatment or thinking they're immune to consequences. The stories entitled "Lady Finally Gets What She Deserves" and "Lady is Convinced That Laws Don't Apply to Her" showcase the downfall of two such individuals who thought they could get away with just about anything. One learns a hard lesson when her sense of entitlement finally catches up with her, while the other faces reality after trying to sidestep the law. These tales, humorous and eye-opening, remind us that no one is truly untouchable and that actions have consequences, no matter who you are. Story 1, entitled "Lady Finally Gets What She Deserves." When the truth is finally revealed, Linda seems to have stripped her pride bare, and the self-satisfied facade she has always displayed is torn away, leaving her naked before the scrutiny of those around her. At first, she tried to keep her posture straight with defiant eyes, her legs firmly unmoving, as if her pride would protect her from all the gossip. However, when the policeman coldly announced that they had enough evidence of her actions, Linda's eyes began to waver. The rays of arrogance disappeared, replaced by a creeping unease, making her eyes widen, revealing confusion and helplessness. The look that had always been arrogant, as if wanting to assert herself as superior to others, now shattered like glass, meeting a hammer, shattering into pieces. Her face turned red, partly from shame, partly from surprise, as if she couldn't believe that her confidence and arrogance could be so easily destroyed. At that moment, Linda felt like all the attention was on her, without any sympathy. The crowd gradually grew larger and larger, each gaze focused on her, not just out of curiosity, but with scrutiny, as if pondering every detail of a satirical story. Some people even snickered secretly, those laughs reaching Linda's ears, making her feel more humiliated than ever. People took out their phones, not hesitating to record this scene. Linda knew that soon her story would spread, becoming a topic of discussion, of ridicule, and each time her image would be exposed once again. In a moment of despair, Linda tried to speak, wanting to justify herself, wanting to protect her remaining dignity. However, all she could say were fragmented words, not forming sentences, as if her sense of self-respect had vanished as soon as the truth was revealed. She stammered, confused, like a child who had made a mistake for the first time, no longer confident enough to look straight at others. The feeling of humiliation and helplessness was like a tidal wave, crashing into her, causing her legs that had once walked confidently to now tremble as if they could no longer stand. Linda was completely alone, unable to find a single sympathetic gaze in the crowd watching. Those gazes seemed to be tearing apart the arrogant shell that Linda had worked so hard to build up for so long. Her bewildered eyes scanned the faces in the crowd, searching for a sympathetic look, but all she received was indifference, coldness. A feeling of emptiness invaded her. The people around were not only indifferent, but some even chuckled at her ironic scene. Her arrogance had led her to a humiliating end that no one expected. In that moment, Linda really felt so small that she couldn't believe it. Linda's eyes kept moving, scanning the crowd as if searching for a ray of hope, a friendly look, some sympathy to salvage the bit of honor that had been taken away. But what she received were only cold eyes, even indifference, strangeness. The crowd not only silently watched, but there were also people who did not hide their mockery, their eyes as if they were looking at a stranger without any sympathy. Some people even burst out laughing. The furtive laughter seemed to add fuel to the fire of shame that was burning Linda. She raised her head, her eyes bewildered, trying to find a spiritual support, but only saw strange, indifferent faces. Linda had always been used to admiring looks and compliments, but now all that was left was ridicule and scrutinizing looks. "No, it's not like that. She tried to justify herself, but her words seemed to get stuck in her throat. Her voice was lost, trembling uncontrollably. Linda used to be proud of her sharp speaking ability, always knowing how to control the situation, but now she couldn't even form a complete sentence. In that moment, everything around her seemed to spin, laughter, mocking gazes mixed together into an inseparable chaos. That feeling was like a terrible nightmare where she couldn't escape the judgment and criticism of the people around her. All her self-esteem, which used to be a shell to protect her from all harm, was now crumbling. She couldn't escape the scrutiny of the people around her, as if the perfect shell she had always maintained for so long was now torn apart. In utter disappointment, Linda no longer had the strength to maintain her composure. Her hands were clenched so tightly that her fingers were white, but it did nothing to calm her down. Her whole body was shaking, as if even a slight breeze could knock her down. Her palms were soaked with cold sweat, a sign of helplessness. In those brief moments, Linda not only felt trapped in an embarrassing situation, but also realized that her arrogance and complacency had made things worse. When an officer stepped forward asking her to put her hands out for handcuffs, Linda could barely react. She stood still, her legs no longer as steady as before. The sense of pride, the arrogant look that she had always carried like a shield, had now completely disappeared. In its place was defeat, humiliation, and the feeling that she had no way back. She kept her head down, not daring to look up to face anyone, as if just looking into someone else's eyes would burn her with shame. Linda knew that there was no way to justify her actions anymore. All her words had become meaningless. In that moment, she felt smaller than ever. Linda's steps became heavy, as if she had no strength to continue. Her legs, which had always been confident and agile, now faltered, as if she no longer had enough energy to continue. She tried to walk, but each step was heavy, no different from a loser stumbling into a dead-end journey. Linda's feeling at this moment was not victory, but collapse, a complete collapse of the self-esteem that had been built up for so long. She had nothing to protect, and no one was here to protect her. Linda's complacent gait, which had always been arrogant and confident, had now completely disappeared. Instead, she walked with a dejected look, her shoulders hunched like someone who had just been stripped of all her most precious things. Each step she took now was heavy, as if the weight of shame and failure was pressing down on her body. No longer the proud gait of someone who thought she could dominate everything around her, Linda now looked like a person who had lost all pride, like a proud peacock that had just had its feathers plucked, bare and weak. She clearly felt her own emptiness, realizing that the power she thought she held was just a fragile shell, easily broken when faced with the truth. The feeling of pride that had been nurtured in her for so long was no longer present, replaced by a painful awareness of her own foolishness. Linda, who had always been proud of herself and what she had, now felt like she had lost everything. She felt small, lost in the world around her. Everything she had thought was invulnerable was now exposed and collapsed in an instant. Her eyes no longer held the complacency they once held, but instead were filled with anxiety, self-doubt. Linda's slow, careful steps are a reminder of the price of arrogance, when she thought she was the center of attention, when she thought she could act without responsibility. Now, she is the one who has to pay the consequences. Linda's story is not only the story of an individual, but also a profound lesson about arrogance and pride. Sometimes those who try to prove themselves special, those who always try to separate themselves from the crowd with pride, are the ones who have to face the punishment first. Linda used to think that her complacency was a protective shield, helping her to always stand out and be admired by everyone, but she did not realize that such power was not sustainable. When the lies and lack of humility were exposed, what was left was an empty and weak person, unable to protect herself. In the process of facing shame, Linda also gradually realized an important truth. In this world, humility and respect for others are the lasting values. arrogance can help us stand out for a moment, but it will never be a solid foundation for building a long-term and meaningful life. Linda understood that instead of seeking recognition from those around us by showing off that she is special, sincerity, humility, and respect for others are the only ways to be truly respected. The message that this story conveys is not only a lesson for Linda, but also a reminder for all of us. Pride and arrogance can lead to wrong decisions, and sometimes the most shameful outcome is the price to pay for that pride. We cannot live in a world that only thinks about ourselves and seeks to affirm ourselves through external prominence. Humility and respect are the values that really take us far in life. Linda, like a mirror, becomes a clear testament to that truth. The arrogant will eventually face their downfall when there is no one left to stand behind them. As one entitled lady faces the harsh reality of her actions, another steps into the spotlight, completely convinced that the rules simply don't apply to her. Story 2. Lady is convinced that laws don't apply to her. It was a beautiful sunny day, and Linda, a woman so confident that she could make the sun shine in her eyes, was driving at 54 miles per hour in a 35-mile zone. She drove as if the street was her own. When the police officer signaled for the car to stop, Linda, unfazed, turned and said, "No, I was only going 40 miles per hour." Her words sounded like she had invented a magic formula for a soft drink, leaving the police officer bewildered. The police officer patiently asked Linda to show her driver's license and registration, but Linda shook her head confidently, as if she had lifted a veil of mystery that the police officer could not understand. "I am a sovereign citizen. I don't need a driver's license to operate a vehicle," Linda declared, as if she had just revealed a state secret. The officer raised his eyebrows, staring at her, not knowing how to react to such an arrogant and unreasonable statement. His eyes flashed with surprise, but then fatigue immediately began to creep in. When the officer insisted on her papers, Linda did not flinch. "Sir, I was not driving. I was traveling." Her words came out as if traveling were some kind of legal immunity. She explained that it was an inalienable right, although no one knew what traveling meant in this context. She stood firm like a warrior, believing that she was fighting for the cause of freedom, while the officer sighed, certain that he was dealing with an unofficial legal expert that no one had ever heard of. With each statement Linda made, the crowd around her began to pay attention, some of them secretly taking out their phones to record the scene as if they were witnessing a street play. A few giggles rang out, making Linda feel like she was acting out a role in her own comedy, and this only pushed her confidence to the peak. As for the policeman, he could only shrug and continue to ask for her cooperation, while in his heart he was surely wondering if he could handle this situation without being seen as a clown in Linda's play. When the officer patiently explained that, in Florida, a driver's license was mandatory, Linda immediately protested, "That law doesn't apply to me." Her voice was firm and defiant. She stood as steady as a steel pillar, her gaze unwavering, as if the officer's every word was nonsense. "Who told you I have to follow the law here? I'm not part of this system," Linda continued, as if she were an alien from another world where rules and regulations were a game for weaklings. The officer, trying to stay calm, asked her to get out of the car, but Linda continued to protest. "Why should I get out? There's no reason," she insisted, her tone unflinching. She looked at the officer as if he was the one in the wrong, and his demands were worthless. A few passers-by stopped to watch this strange scene, and they began to whisper and gossip. Some even took out their phones to record it, as if this was a street play that they couldn't miss. The tension in the air rose. The police officer could no longer hold his patience. He decided to give a sterner warning. "If you don't cooperate, I will have to arrest you for obstructing the execution of official duties." However, Linda still didn't show any signs of worry. She still stood firm like a warrior in a never-ending battle. All her challenges, all the police officers' statements couldn't shake her will. The people standing around couldn't believe their eyes. They were witnessing a confrontation between a police officer and an arrogant woman who thought she was above all laws. The atmosphere became heavy, but Linda didn't feel scared or confused. She only knew that no matter who objected, no matter who filmed this scene, she would not give up. When the police announced that Linda would be arrested for driving without a license and having a warrant for her arrest, a feeling of terror suddenly enveloped her. In that moment, Linda was no longer the confident woman she had been before, but someone on the verge of collapse. She panicked, hurriedly begging, "Mom will know I'm right. Mom will understand, of course." Her voice rang out with hope, as if calling her mother's name was the only key to escape this situation. But the police remained silent, not responding to her request. And that, once again, was the end of Linda's escape. When the police searched the car, they discovered that Linda's Mississippi driver's license had long since expired. And when they checked her other papers, they discovered a court appearance notice that she had missed. Everything seemed to be falling apart. Linda felt like her heart was being torn apart, but she couldn't stop. She just wanted to find a way to deny, to justify her past mistakes. "It was just medical marijuana," she cried, panic and confusion in her voice. But those words couldn't hide the truth. The police had no reason to forgive, and Linda, despite trying to stand her ground, knew that she couldn't escape her responsibility. At this point, everything was too obvious. The legal issues she had been trying to avoid had officially surfaced, and Linda began to feel as if she was completely exposed, with no way out. She swallowed, feeling the coldness of reality. Her mother couldn't save her from those mistakes, and now no one could save her from the cost of her past bad decisions. Even though she had been arrested and her car was towed away, Linda still refused to give up her belief that she was absolutely right. She stood there, waving her arms in the air, as if she were explaining an important lesson to everyone and as if the whole world didn't understand her. "It's my right. Driving is a right, not a law," she shouted, her eyes shining with fierce conviction. In her eyes, personal interests took precedence over any other rules. But the police officer, with a face devoid of emotion, remained calm. He could only shake his head and say in a steady but firm voice, "Ma'am, the law is necessary for public safety. No one wants to see you driving without a license, and no one wants to see you put yourself at risk or harm others." The policeman's tone did not change, as if he was used to such situations, and Linda's challenge did not move him at all.